Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to RAU'S IAS DNS session. We are going to have a discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition, dated 28th March 2022. We shall take up articles only relevant to the exam and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. Before we begin with today's discussion, there is a very important announcement. The first prelims compass, the compass for history and culture, has already been launched on Amazon. The link to this will be given in the description section. It's high time that you buckle up and you go all out for your prelims preparation. I'm sure you must be taking tests, and along with that, just to have an updated knowledge and a quick revision, you must follow the prelims compass as well. This article is from page number 10. States can identify minorities. This is the submission of the central government in the Supreme Court. See, recently, Ashwani Upadhyaya was a petitioner in the Supreme Court alleging that central government has bestowed on itself unbridled power to identify minorities. As an explanation and submission to that petition, the central government has submitted in the Supreme Court that states have equal powers in identification of minorities. See, the distribution of the legislative and executive power between the center and the state is enumerated in Article 246. Article 246 has the list of subjects in List 1, List 2, and List 3. The List 3 is the concurrent list, and entry 20 in List 3 is economic and social planning. It is through this entry in the concurrent list that the central government has come up with National Commission for Minorities Act of 1992. But howsoever, it is very clear that this entry is in concurrent list, so the parliament and the state legislature, they have concurrent powers to enact laws to provide protection to minorities and their interest. So under the executive competence of National Commission for Minorities Act of 1992, the central government has notified 6 communities as minorities in India: Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Parsis, and Jains. However, religious and linguistic minorities have also been declared by state government. For example, Maharashtra has notified Jews as minority community. Karnataka has notified Urdu, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, Marathi, Tulu, Lambadi, Hindi, Konkani, and Gujarati as minority languages. So to the clarification sought by Supreme Court, the center has opined that laying down guidelines for identification of minority at state level may be considered by the state government. For the purpose of your prelims examination, you must be aware that the term minority is not defined in the Constitution. But the Constitution mentions minorities twice. You will find the mention of the term minority in Article 29 and Article 30. Constitution recognizes religious and linguistic minority. Even the National Commission for Minority Act, which empowers the central government to declare some communities as minorities, does not define minority. In a sense, it defines it, but it doesn't give a proper definition. It defines a minority as a community notified as such by the central government. There's a definition of minority coming from United Nations. UN's definition of minority is any group or community which is socially, politically, and economically non-dominant and inferior in population. You must be aware that state reorganization in India has been done on linguistic lines. So linguistic minorities have to be necessarily defined on the unit of a state. And the Constitution mentions linguistic and religious minorities in the same breath. Using this, Supreme Court has declared that linguistic and religious minorities are covered by the expression minority under Article 30 of the Constitution. And since reorganization of states in India has been done on linguistic lines, therefore, for the purpose of determining the minority, the unit will be state and not the whole of India. The basis is that religious and linguistic minorities have been put on par in Article 30. Article 30 talks about religious and linguistic minorities in the same breath. So both minorities are considered to be on a par. And states are made on linguistic lines, so linguistic minorities must be necessarily defined on the unit of a state. And by extension, since both minorities are at par under Article 30, both must be considered state-wise. All in all, religious and linguistic minorities must be considered state-wise. This is the declaration of the Supreme Court. But you already know that the center has declared 6 minorities, and then there are questions. Muslims declared minorities were in majority in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. Christians are in majority in many of the states in the northeast. Sikhs are in majority in the state of Punjab. And in these states, Hindus, Parsis, Bahamis, they are in minority. But since they have not been declared minorities, so they cannot be running their educational and cultural institutions on the lines of minorities under Article 30, and hence the petition. Although this stand of Supreme Court is very clear that they have to be defined state-wise. But the summation of the center is using its power under Article 246 through entry 20 of concurrent list. Central government has come up with National Commission for Minorities Act 1992. And using Section 2C of the Act, 6 minority communities have been declared. Things as it stands today, this has not been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. A petition has been filed, Supreme Court has asked for explanation, and this is the explanation that the central government has given, that it is within its constitutional right, within Article 346 to do so. The suggestion that the central government has given that it is the concurrent power of the center and the state to declare minorities, and if states intend to declare minorities, they can go ahead and do it. But the final legal and constitutional position on it will come from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has made this observation previously, but still there is no absolute clarity whether it has to be state-wise and who has to declare it. But still there is not enough clarity on the issue, because if it has to be state-wise, whether the state government has to do it or center is still entitled. And can a community be declared minority in a state when they are in majority overall? These questions perhaps will be clarified in due course. There is an article on page number 12. Supreme Court seeks foolproof norm to identify scheduled tribes. This identification of scheduled tribe is not for the community. This identification that the court is talking about is regarding providing scheduled tribe certificate to individuals who come to seek them. So Supreme Court wants to have a foolproof parameters to determine if a person belongs to scheduled tribe, and hence if he or she is entitled to get the benefit due to the community. See, there is something called as Affinity Test. The administration so far has been relying on Affinity Test for the purpose of giving certification for scheduled caste or scheduled tribe. It is used to test or examine the anthropological and ethnological traits of a person, and hence to link a person to a particular tribe. Affinity here means association. Association with a particular tribe for which the concerned individual is seeking the certificate. And this affinity test is done on the basis of some parameters like deity, rituals that individual and the tribes follow, mode of marriage, death ceremonies, method of burial of dead bodies, and other such parameters. So the certificate issuing authority matches these traits in the individual and the anthropological and the ethnological traits of the tribe. But lately, a bench of Supreme Court has opined that there is likelihood that contact with other cultures, migration, modernization, would have erased these traditional characteristics of a tribe. Back in 2009, a full bench of Bombay High Court held that the affinity test was an integral part of the verification process for caste certification. Scrutiny committees shall easily determine the authenticity of a claim by running an affinity test on the basis of ethnicity and anthropology. But just 2 years after, Supreme Court in 2011 has given a cautionary note. It indicated that the affinity test may have run its course. And in Anand versus Committee for Scrutiny and Verification of the Tribe's Claim reasoned that affinity test may have been a determinative factor a few decades ago, when the tribes were somewhat immune to the cultural development happening around them. But with migrations, modernizations, and contact with other communities, these communities tend to develop and adopt new traits, and which may not essentially match the traditional characteristics of the tribe. So naturally, affinity test may not be regarded as a litmus test for establishing the link of the applicant with the scheduled tribe. And hence the stand of the bench of the Supreme Court was that the affinity test may be used to corroborate the documentary evidence and should not be sole criteria to reject a claim. But what will be the criteria to accept the claim? For that, the bench of the Supreme Court has opined that the matter should go to a full bench of Supreme Court. This perhaps will be settled in due course For the coming prelims examination, you should be aware of certain things. You should know that the term scheduled tribes is mentioned in the constitution, but it is not defined. Clause 25 of Article 366 refers to scheduled tribes as such tribes or tribal communities or parts or groups within such tribes or tribal communities as deemed under Article 342. And Article 342 Clause 1 reads like this: the President may, with respect to any state or union territory, and where it is the case of a state, after consultation with the governor thereof by public notification, specify the tribes or tribal communities or part or groups within tribes or tribal communities which shall, for the purpose of this constitution, be deemed to be scheduled tribes in relation to that state or union territory. So remember, scheduled tribes are declared for a particular state or union territory. Clause 2 of Article 342 says, Parliament may by law exclude or include from the list of scheduled tribes specified in a notification issued under Clause 1 any tribe or tribal community or part or group within that tribe or tribal community, but save as aforesaid a notification issued under the said clause shall not be varied by any subsequent notification. The language is very convoluted, but what it means is this. Scheduled tribes are notified by order of President, and they are notified for a particular state or union territory. In case of a state, governor's consultation has to be done. Once notification has been out, it can be modified only through Act of Parliament. The criteria generally that the executive follows for declaration of scheduled tribe has been given by Lokur Committee, which was formed in 1965. The committee specifically was formed to look into criteria for defining scheduled tribes, and the committee gave 5 criteria. Number 1, the tribe should show primitive traits in their way of life, in their habitats, in their economic activities, in their agricultural practices, etc. They must have a distinctive culture. They must have geographical isolation, shyness of contact within the community at large, and economic backwardness. Scheduled tribes have been notified in 30 states and UTs in India, and no community has been declared as scheduled tribe in the state of Haryana and Punjab and union territories of Chhattisgarh, Delhi, and Puducherry. The state of Odisha has highest number of tribes declared as scheduled tribes, numbered 62. And as per the last census of 2011, Madhya Pradesh has highest population of scheduled tribes. Scheduled tribes comprise roughly 8. As per the census of 2011, scheduled tribes comprise 8.6% of India's population. There are other important articles in today's newspaper as well. For example, this article from page number 7, Profit over Public Health. This article concerns with the IPR issues around essential medicines. But this already has been discussed in great detail in the DNS dated 23rd March. Similarly, there is an article on India-UAE Trade Pact which is likely to get operative from May 1. Day before yesterday, our charismatic illustrious Vaibhav sir discussed the concept of free trade agreement in a free-flowing manner. And previously, Mangal sir has discussed India and UAE trade agreement. There's also an article on the voting rights of overseas citizens of India. Again, in the DNS of day before yesterday, from the prelims perspective, Vaibhav sir had discussed the concept already. And previously, Mangal sir has discussed it in quite detail. So it seems like the articles which are important in today's newspaper already has been discussed. So what we will do is we will have a quick speed test. There are 20 questions in this speed test. They are of the nature of true or false statement. You have to read the statement and identify whether they are true or false. You must seriously sit down and attempt the test with utmost sincerity. You shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to take the test. Only when you are through the test, listen to the discussion. Calculate your score, post it in the comment section, and have some fruitful discussion. So you can pause the video, take the test, and then resume the discussion. Working with the assumption that you have taken the test already, the first statement was, state reorganization in India has been on linguistic lines. This is absolutely correct statement, and this is pretty basic, you would know it. Although the leaders were not in favor of this, but this eventually happened because of the popular demand. UPSC has asked previously that linguistic division of a state has strengthened the diversity and integrity of India rather than the perceived threat of that time, that it will weaken the Union of India. The second statement was the President declares minorities in India on the recommendation of Ministry of Minority Affairs. Well, the President declares it, but that mostly is on the recommendation of Cabinet and Council of Ministers, not particularly the Ministry of Minority Affairs. This statement is false. As per the Constitution, minorities have to be declared state-wise. This is the reading of Supreme Court into the provision of Constitution that they must be declared state-wise. The reasoning of Supreme Court is that the states have been created on linguistic lines. In Article 30, talk about linguistic minorities and religious minorities in the same breath. So Article 30 puts both minorities at par. Because the states have been reorganized on linguistic lines, so it makes sense that the linguistic minorities are defined at the level of state. And because linguistic minorities and religious minorities are at par, so they must also be declared state-wise. But this argument or this provision clearly has not been mentioned in the Constitution. So this is not as per the Constitution. This is as per the wisdom of the Supreme Court. So the statement is false. The term minority has not been defined in the Constitution, but it has been defined, and the criteria of declaration of minorities has been given in the National Commission for Minorities Act 1992. Well, minority has not been defined in the Constitution. So far, correct. It has been for the namesake defined in the Act, and the definition is as has been identified by the central government. But the criteria of declaration has not been mentioned in the National Commission for Minorities Act of 1992 either. So even if you do the hair splitting of this part, whether it has been defined in the Act or not, the criteria of declaration, this part of the statement makes the entire statement incorrect. The fifth statement was states can declare minorities. This whole business of declaration of minorities comes from entry 20 of the concurrent list, which talks about economic and social planning. And since it's in the concurrent list, so central government has agreed in the Supreme Court that states can also declare minorities. But it's a different thing that we have discussed already, that the Supreme Court's opinion is that it must be declared state-wise. But who can declare it? So far, the central government also declares it largely, and the state government also declare it. For example, Maharashtra government has declared Jews as minority in the state. This statement is true. Scheduled tribes are declared by the President on the recommendation of the governor. See, scheduled tribes are declared by the President. But this term here, recommendation, makes the statement incorrect. Scheduled tribes are declared by the President in the state and union territories. So states and union territories are the units for declaration of scheduled tribes. They are declared state-wise. And in the case of state, the President consults governor. President has to consult the governor, not necessarily that President has to take the decision on the recommendation of the governor. Governor does not recommend to the President, rather, President consults the governor. It's not the same thing. The statement is false. States also have the power to declare scheduled tribes on the recommendation of the Council of Ministers. So in scheduled areas, governor has the power to declare the scheduled tribes. Governor has lots of power in his hand regarding the administration of the scheduled tribes, but it is not the state government actually which has the power of declaring scheduled tribes. And not at all on the recommendation of the Council of Ministers. It is the governor wholly and solely who takes the decision. It is not on the recommendation of Council of Ministers. So again, the statement becomes false. Article 342 gives out the criteria for identification of scheduled tribes. Article 342 talks about the power of the President to declare scheduled tribes. But the criteria for identification of scheduled tribes not mentioned in the Constitution. Statement is wholly and solely and plainly incorrect. It was actually the Lokur Committee appointed in 1965 that gave out the criteria for identification of scheduled tribes. The next statement is Lokur Committee is associated with the ways to integrate tribal community in the mainstream. This is absolutely bizarre statement because there is no effort, there is no ideology that we have to integrate the tribal community in the mainstream. We want them to prosper, but we have no intention of integrating them in the mainstream. Previously, at the time of British, it was thought that they are backward people and they must be mainstreamed. Presently, both nationally and internationally, the current position that the governments and international bodies hold is to not integrate them in the mainstream. Rather, their unique identity must be maintained. So this statement for that reason is absolutely incorrect. Madhya Pradesh has the highest number of notified scheduled tribes in India. If you have paid attention, you would know this is absolutely incorrect statement. Madhya Pradesh indeed has the largest number of scheduled tribes. Scheduled tribes as a whole, population-wise. But if you look at the number of scheduled tribes, which is more than 700, around 705 all over India, number of scheduled tribes, that way, it is Odisha that holds the largest number of notified scheduled tribes, 62. The provision of regional election commissioners is contained in the constitution, but it has never been used. You must be reading about regional election commissioners. The news about regional election commissioner has been making news for quite some time in the last 2-3 days. The reason is that the parliamentary panel preparing a report for demand on grant for the legislative department of the Ministry of Law has recommended that election commission for the coming general election of 2024 can use the provision of regional commissioners contained in the constitution so that the election commission has enough manpower to handle the business of conducting election efficiently. According to Article 324, Provision 4, before each general election to the House of the People and to the Legislative Assembly of each state, and before the first general election and thereafter, before each biennial election of the Legislative Council of each state having the councils, the President may also appoint. Who appoints it? President. The President may also appoint, after consultation with the Election Commission, such regional commissioners as he may consider necessary. So the provision for appointment of regional commissioners are there in the Constitution, but the statement has said it has never been used. Now this part of the statement makes it incorrect. It has been used after first general election in Bombay and Patna, and thereafter it has never been used. So to say absolutely it has never been used is absolutely wrong. Home Ministry is the nodal agency in the government to deal with issues relating to Election Commission. Actually, it is the legislative department or the law ministry, not the home ministry. So this statement is again false. Now look at the 13th statement. Originally, the Constitution of India had the provision of a chief election commissioner and only one other election commissioner. Presently, you know it's a 3-member body, so one chief election commissioner and 2 election commissioners. But this statement, unfortunately, again, is incorrect. Originally, the Constitution of India had the provision of just one chief election commissioner. But in 1989, via executive order, changes were made, and changes were made using Article 324(2), which authorizes the President to decide the composition of Election Commission. So an executive order under the seal of President was given to increase the membership of Election Commission, adding 2 more election commissioners. And those 2 election commissioners later, in 1993, were brought at par with the Chief Election Commissioner. T.N. Session, as you would know, the famous celebrated Chief Election Commissioner of India, was not pleased by this decision, and he was the Chief Election Commissioner of that time. But in the case T.N. Session versus Union of India in 1995, Supreme Court upheld this decision. 1, because via Article 324(2), President is authorized to decide the composition of Election Commission. And 2, since Election Commission has huge responsibility of conducting vast-scale election in India, and credibility of Election Commissioner is fundamental to the credibility of Indian democracy. So for such an important body not to become authoritarian, the reasoning was that the power of Election Commission should not be handed only in one man. So based on this, Supreme Court upheld the executive decision, and later using legislation, changes were brought about in the composition of Election Commission. Article 326 declares that elections to the Lok Sabha and legislative assemblies of states are to be done on the basis of adult suffrage. Now, from the perspective of prelims examination, certain important basic articles of Constitution has to be very well known to you. This is absolutely correct statement. The provisions of elections are contained in Part 15 of the Constitution. Article 324 of the Constitution provides for general superintendence, direction and control of elections to Parliament, state legislature, the office of President, Vice President, and all these are vested in the Election Commission. Article 324 gives unbridled power to the Election Commission to conduct elections in India concerning the office that we have talked about. Article 325 says that no person will be excluded from the electoral roll on the ground of religion, race, caste or sex. It is Article 326 that talks about Elections to be conducted on the basis of adult suffrage. Article 327 gives power to the Parliament to make provisions with respect to elections to legislature as well. But Article 328 also talks about the power of legislature of a state to make provisions with respect to elections to a state legislature. Article 329 bars interference by courts in electoral matters. Okay, the statement 15 was there is no prescribed procedure for appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and election commissioners. This, unfortunately, is a true statement. It is a pure executive decision, and President appoints Chief Election Commissioner on the recommendation of Prime Minister. There is no search and selection committee for the appointment of Chief Election Commissioner or election commissioners. Chief Election Commissioner of India can be removed from his office by the order of President, but the decision must be acceptable to the Supreme Court. This statement is incorrect. To maintain the independence of Election Commission, the Constitution has made the provision that removal of Chief Election Commissioner is not such an easy thing. Chief Election Commissioner is removed by the same process as judge of a Supreme Court or a High Court. Statement 17, rules of origin, often in news, is associated with free trade agreement. This is absolutely correct statement, and you must be reading about it quite often in the newspaper. Suppose India has a free trade agreement with Philippines. The Chinese goods can be coming to Philippines, and those goods can again be injected into India, showing that they are originating from Philippines. In such a scenario, the rules of origin are not enforced properly. India has signed comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Australia. This term Australia makes the statement incorrect. India is in the process of discussion and negotiation to sign CEPA with Australia, but so far it has not been finalized. The statement is incorrect. UAE is India's third largest trading partner after China and the USA. This statement is correct, and you have to take note of it for the coming prelims exam. UAE is India's third largest trading partner. UAE is also India's second largest export destination after US. And UAE is 8th largest investor in India. This rank keeps changing, sometime 8th, sometime 9th. Currently, NRIs can vote electronically, but overseas citizens of India do not have voting rights. See, currently, overseas citizens of India do not have voting rights. This is absolutely correct. And NRIs have voting rights. But NRIs cannot vote electronically. There's a system of sending the postal ballot electronically, meaning the form that you have to fill up, that is sent electronically. So the registered voters, NRIs, they have to download the form, fill it up, and then sign it in front of an appointed officer. And then that is sent via mail. So the voting is not done electronically. It's just the postal ballot that is sent electronically. So that is not electronic voting. That's not e-voting. So the statement becomes incorrect. Quickly calculate your score, post that in the comment section, and have some discussion in statements that you have found difficult or confusing. Answer to yesterday's question of the day should be option B. The question was exports of India could rise under which of the following reasons? Option 1 is rising value of rupee. If the value of rupee increases, then rupee will get stronger. So in the exchange rate, for every dollar, there will be fewer rupees. So the exporters will get lesser amount. Remember, weakening rupee is beneficial for exporters. Today's question of the day is this. Consider the following statements with respect to scheduled tribes. Statement 1. Constitution specifies the parameters to be considered while declaring a community as scheduled tribe. Statement 2. President of India can amend the scheduled tribe list only after consulting the governors of the concerned states. Which of the statements given above is correct? 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, neither 1 nor 2. Thank you very much for being with me. Goodbye. Take care.